The story of the American landscape is often told through its soaring skyscrapers and bustling metropolises, but its truest history may lie in the silence of its ruins. To understand the American ghost town, one must look back to the mid-19th century, a feverish era defined by the philosophy of manifest destiny. This was the belief that the United States was divinely ordained to expand across the continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This "go west" mentality didn't just move people, it ignited a frantic, chaotic race to claim a piece of the wilderness. As the frontier pushed forward, it gave birth to a unique phenomenon, the instant city. These were hubs built not on the foundation of sustainable agriculture or long-term trade, but on the sheer adrenaline of discovery. When a prospector shouted gold in a remote California canyon or a silver vein was struck in the high deserts of Nevada, the world responded with a thundering stampede. Within weeks, what had been a quiet valley would be transformed into a jagged skyline of pine-board saloons, canvas tents, and makeshift hotels. These towns were the physical manifestation of American optimism, a belief that wealth was waiting just beneath the soil for anyone brave enough to dig. However, they were built with the understanding that life was a gamble. Because the goal was rapid extraction rather than settlement, the architecture was often prefabricated in spirit. Buildings were thrown together with green lumber, and foundations were shallow. These hubs were designed to be temporary, yet they pulsed with more life, violence, and commerce than many established eastern cities. At their peak, places like Bodie, California, or Virginia City, Montana, boasted opera houses, newspapers, and international populations, all thriving in locations that were geographically hostile to human life. The tragedy and the poetry of these places was that they were destined to fade from the moment the first nail was driven. They were monoculture economies, entirely dependent on a single, finite resource. The Go West spirit was a nomadic one. It didn't value staying, it valued seeking. As soon as the ore grew thin, or the cattle trails shifted, the same restless energy that built the town became the engine of its destruction. When the local mine finally shuttered, the exodus was often as fast as the arrival. Families packed what they could carry, often leaving behind heavy furniture, school books, and storefront signs, convinced they would find better fortunes over the next mountain range. Today, these skeletal remains stand as monuments to a specific American paradox, a relentless drive for progress that often leaves the past discarded in the dust. They are the footprints of a nation that moved too fast to look back, leaving behind ghosts that continue to haunt the desert winds. The American West was not settled by a slow, methodical crawl of farmers. It was ignited by a frantic, sparkling promise. In 1848, when James Marshall spotted flecks of gold in the American River at Sutter Mills, he didn't just find a mineral, he sparked a global migration. This golden fever became the primary architect of the western United States, carving cities out of granite and sagebrush in a matter of months. The speed of this transformation was staggering. In the mountains of California, Nevada, and Colorado, the discovery of a lode, a rich vein of ore, acted like a magnetic force. Men from all walks of life, dubbed 49ers, abandoned their shops in New England, their farms in the Midwest, and even their homes in Europe and China. They arrived in the wilderness with nothing but pans, picks, and a desperate hope. To serve them, boomtowns emerged with a velocity that defied urban planning. Take, for example, Virginia City, Nevada. Following the discovery of the Comstock lode in 1859, a barren mountainside was transformed into the richest city in America. At its height, it wasn't just a collection of shacks, it was a cosmopolitan marvel perched on a steep slope. It boasted grand The anatomy is completed by the surrounding graveyard of machinery. Scattered across the outskirts are the bones of industry. Rusted ore wagons with shattered wheels, steam boilers that look like fallen titans, and the dark, gaping maws of mine shafts that have been reclaimed by shadows. These towns are not dead in the traditional sense. They are suspended. In the dry climate of the American West, the wood doesn't rot so much as it mummifies. This preservation allows the visitor to see the town as it truly was, a fragile, brave attempt to impose order on a wild landscape. As the sun sets, casting long, jagged shadows across the empty streets, the anatomy of the town reveals a profound truth. In the American West, nature always has the final word. In the life cycle of a Western mining hub, there was a terrifyingly thin line between a boom and a funeral. If a town's birth was a frantic explosion of noise and greed, its death was often a slow, suffocating silence. This was the era of the monoculture economy, where every single heartbeat of the community, the payroll of the shopkeeper, the sermon of the preacher, and the milk in the child's glass, was pumped from deep underground. When the ore veins ran dry, the town didn't just enter a recession, it suffered a total systemic failure. The moment of death for an ore town was rarely a sudden catastrophe like a fire or a flood. It was the quiet realization that the earth had stopped giving. It usually began at the assay office. For years, the rocks pulled from the dark tunnels had been rich with streaks of yellow or veins of blue-gray silver. Then the quality would dip. The high grade became low grade, and eventually it became waste rock. In the boardrooms of San Francisco or New York, investors would look at a ledger, see the cost of extraction exceeding the value of the mineral, and simply stop the pumps. The sound of the pumps stopping was the true death knell. In deep shaft mining, constant pumping was required to keep the subterranean water at bay. The moment the steam engines hissed their last and the pumps fell silent, the lower levels of the mine, the town's only source of life, would begin to flood. To the miners standing on the surface, that silence meant the bank was closed forever. The economic collapse was instantaneous and brutal. Because these towns were often located in geographical dead zones, barren deserts, or frozen mountain peaks, there was no plan B. You couldn't turn a gold mine into a farm when there was no topsoil or water. You couldn't turn a silver hub into a manufacturing center when the nearest railroad was 50 miles away and owned by a company that was also pulling out. As the payroll dried up, the vanishing of money created a domino effect. The miners, who lived hand-to-mouth, were the first to flee. When they stopped buying whiskey and flour, the saloons and general stores boarded their windows. The local newspaper would print its final somber edition, often containing a farewell message to the brave souls who tried to tame the mountain. Property values didn't just drop, they evaporated. A grand hotel that cost $50,000 to build in 1875 might be traded for a sturdy horse and a pack saddle by 1885. The abandonment was an act of cold, hard math. In the American West, sentimentality didn't pay the bills. When the profit disappeared, the people followed the color to the next strike, leaving behind a hollow shell of a city. These ruins stand today as a stark warning about the fragility of economies built on a single resource, reminders that when the earth finally closes its hand, the cities we build on top of it simply blow away with the dust. High in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where the wind bites with a relentless chill and the sun bleaches the earth to a pale tan, the moment a town lost its status as a necessary stop, the stranded effect began. In places like the high plains of Kansas or the desert stretches of Arizona, towns that had existed for 70 years to service steam engines suddenly found themselves with no reason to be. The local economy, which revolved around the depot, the station hotel, and the diner that fed hungry passengers, withered almost overnight. When the last passenger train whistled through without stopping and the station agent finally turned off the lights, the town's connection to the great American machine was severed. Visually, these railroad ghost towns offer a different kind of melancholy than the mining camps. Here, the ruins are often larger and more industrial. You might find a massive, hollowed-out roundhouse, a cathedral of brick and soot where locomotives were once turned and repaired, now standing roofless against the sky. The silver-painted water towers, once vital for steam engines, now stand like rusted sentinels overlooking empty tracks that have been reclaimed by weeds and sunflowers. The abandonment of these hubs created a highway bypass phenomenon. You can still drive through parts of the American West and see the skeletons of gas stations and motels that tried to pivot from trains to cars, only to be killed when a newer, faster four-lane highway opened just over the horizon. These towns didn't run out of ore, they ran out of relevance. They are monuments to an era of transition, marking the exact spot where the American dream traded the communal rhythm of the rail for the individual freedom of the open road. Today, as you speed along the interstate at 70 miles per hour, the flickering remains of these transit hubs in the distance serve as a reminder that in America, progress is often a road that leaves the past behind in the rearview mirror. There is a profound, slow-motion drama unfolding across the American continent, the silent war between human architecture and the natural world. When a town is abandoned, the clock of civilization stops, and the clock of the wild begins to accelerate. Whether in the arid basins of the Southwest or the humid timberlands of the Pacific Northwest, the American landscape does not simply sit beside these ruins, it actively consumes them. This process of reclamation is nature's way of erasing the scars left by the industrial age, turning steel and timber back into earth and shadow. In the high deserts of Nevada and Arizona, the reclamation is a process of mummification and abrasion. Here, the primary weapon of nature is the wind. It carries fine grit that acts like sandpaper, stripping the lead paint off Victorian-era houses until they are nothing but silver-gray skeletons. But even in the parched earth, life finds a way. Creosote bushes and sagebrush push through the cracks in the boardwalks, their roots splitting the wood asunder. Joshua trees stand like silent observers in the middle of what were once busy intersections, while tumbleweeds pile up in the doorways of abandoned banks, acting as a natural barricade against the memory of the living. Contrast this with the ghost towns of the Appalachian Mountains or the Pacific Northwest. In these damp, fertile regions, the reclamation is not a slow drying out, but a lush, green strangulation. Here, the forest moves with terrifying speed. Moss, thick, wet, and emerald, carpets the roofs of cabins until the weight of the moisture collapses the rafters. Kudzu and ivy act like a living shroud, draping over rusted Ford Model Ts and abandoned steam donkeys until they look like strange metallic topiary. In these places, the anatomy of the town is often hidden. You might walk past a former post office and only see a mound of ferns and blackberry brambles, unaware that a piece of history. These towns are monuments to a shattered dream of rain follows the plow. They represent a moment when the American spirit of expansion hit a hard environmental wall. Unlike the mining camps, which were built for the short term, these were intended to be permanent legacies. Their abandonment serves as a somber reminder of human vulnerability to the climate and the lasting scars left on the heart of the country when the rain refuses to fall. While the wooden shacks of the Wild West evoke a sense of distant folklore, a more modern and imposing breed of ghost town haunts the eastern and midwestern United States. This is the Rust Belt, a sprawling industrial corridor that once served as the steel-beating heart of the American dream. In cities across Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana, the landscape is scarred not by abandoned mines, but by massive hollowed-out factories and rows of silent Victorian homes. These are the modern ruins, born from the painful transition of a nation shifting from a manufacturing powerhouse to a service-based economy. The decline was fueled by a perfect storm of automation, the globalization of trade, and the slow death of the American steel and automotive industries. In the mid-20th century, towns like Gary, Indiana, or Youngstown, Ohio, were symbols of middle-class prosperity. A high school diploma was a ticket to a lifetime of secure, union-backed labor in the mills. But as the furnaces cooled and production moved overseas, the economic foundation of these communities didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The result was a new kind of abandonment, urban decay. The anatomy of a Rust Belt ghost town is one of scale and shattered concrete. The most dominant features are the industrial monoliths, factories that span dozens of city blocks, their windows shattered into thousands of jagged teeth. Inside these cathedrals of industry, the silence is deafening. Massive assembly lines that once churned out thousands of cars sit motionless, draped in cobwebs and rust. Giant gantry cranes hang frozen in midair like the fossilized limbs of prehistoric beasts. The smell here isn't of sagebrush, but of damp concrete, old oil, and oxidizing iron. Surrounding these industrial husks are the shrinking neighborhoods. Unlike the isolated camps of the West, these ruins exist in the shadows of lived-in cities. You might see a perfectly maintained house sitting directly next to a collapsed ghost home, where the porch has been swallowed by creeping vines and the roof is bowed under the weight of 100 winter snows. In some areas, entire blocks have been reclaimed by the urban prairie, where the city has demolished so many abandoned structures that the grid of the street is all that remains, with fire hydrants standing alone in fields of tall, wild grass. These modern ruins represent a different psychological weight for the American audience. They aren't the relics of a 19th century adventure, they're the remains of a world our parents and grandparents built. They represent the de-industrialization of the American spirit. To walk through an abandoned school in Detroit or an empty social club in Pittsburgh is to see the physical remains of a social contract that was broken. Yet, there is a strange, haunting beauty in these spaces. Photographers and urban explorers flock to these sites to capture the light filtering through the dust of a grand abandoned theater, or the side of a tree growing through the floor of a former Chrysler plant. These industrial ghosts serve as a powerful memento mori for the modern age, reminding us that even the mightiest empires of steel and smoke are subject to the same laws of gravity and time as the humble gold camps of the frontier. In American lexicon, the word ghost in ghost town is often used metaphorically to describe a lack of living residents. However, for many who visit these desolate sites, the term is far more literal. As the sun dips below the jagged horizons of the Mojave or the heavy silhouettes of the Appalachians, the historical reality of these towns begins to blur into...
For 20 years, the residents tried to live alongside the fire, but by the late 1970s and early 1980s, the danger became impossible to ignore. The ground grew hot to the touch, garden vegetables cooked in the soil, and gas stations reported underground tanks reaching temperatures of 180 degrees Fahrenheit. The most chilling moment occurred in 1981, when a 12-year-old boy was nearly swallowed by a sudden sinkhole that opened in his backyard, a steaming pit that dropped 150 feet into the burning depths. The air became thick with lethal levels of carbon monoxide, and white plumes of toxic steam began to vent from cracks in the asphalt. By 1984, the U.S. government realized that the fire was uncontrollable. A massive relocation project was launched, and over 1,000 residents were paid to leave their homes forever. Most of the buildings were razed to prevent squatters from moving in, leaving behind a grid of streets that lead to nowhere. Today, Centralia is a haunting landscape of empty presence. You can see the remnants of front steps that lead to grassy lots and fire hydrants standing guard over houses that no longer exist. The most iconic image of Centralia is the Graffiti Highway, a stretch of Route 61 that was closed after it began to buckle and crack from the heat below. For years, it was a colorful, mile-long canvas for artists and explorers, though much of it has recently been covered in soil to discourage crowds. Even so, the fire remains. Geologists estimate that there is enough coal in the veins to keep the fire burning for another 250 years. Centralia stands as a unique monument in American history. It is a place where the ghost isn't a figure in a window, but the heat rising from the pavement and the smell of sulfur in the air. It serves as a stark reminder of the unintended consequences of our industrial past, a town where the earth itself rebelled, forcing humanity to flee and leaving behind a smoking, silent void in the heart of Pennsylvania. In the digital age, a new cultural phenomenon has taken hold of the American psyche, a deep, almost magnetic fascination with ruin porn. From high-end coffee table books to viral Instagram reels, the imagery of collapsing barns, rusted car frames, and vine-choked Victorian mansions dominates our visual diet. But why are we so drawn to the sight of things falling apart? For an American audience, the obsession with the photography of decay is more than just a search for a cool aesthetic. It is a complex emotional response to our history, our mortality, and our anxiety about the future. The term ruin porn, often used by critics to describe the glamorization of urban or rural decay, refers to the specific beauty found in the textures of abandonment. There is an undeniable visual richness in the way nature and time interact with human structures. A peeling layer of paint reveals a palette of colors that no modern designer could replicate. The way sunlight filters through a collapsed roof, illuminating a million dancing dust motes over a rotting piano, creates a chiaroscuro effect that feels both cinematic and sacred. Photographers flock to ghost towns like Bodie, where the skeletal remains of Detroit's factories, because these places offer a raw, honest texture that our increasingly plastic and polished modern world lacks. Beyond the aesthetics, our obsession stems from a sense of romantic nostalgia. America is a young nation, and because we lack the ancient Roman or Greek ruins of Europe, our 19th century ghost towns and 20th century industrial husks serve as our modern antiquities. They are the cathedrals of our ancestors. When we look at a photograph of an abandoned classroom in the Dust Bowl, we aren't just looking at trash, we are looking at a mirror. We see the remnants of the American dream and wonder where it went. This curiosity is a form of time travel, allowing us to touch a past that feels more. Ultimately, the struggle to preserve history is a struggle with our own legacy. Are these towns trash or treasure? As budgets shrink and the climate becomes more extreme, the visionaries are forced to make hard choices, deciding which towns to save and which to surrender to the dust. In the end, the preservation of a ghost town is an act of defiance against the inevitable, a way of saying that even though the people are gone, their story still matters enough to fight for. In a world increasingly dominated by polished digital experiences and suburban sprawl, a new kind of American traveler is emerging, the ruins tourist. Instead of seeking out the neon lights of Las Vegas or the manicured lawns of Disney World, thousands of hikers, history buffs, and professional photographers are heading into the remote corners of the West and the heart of the Rust Belt. Here, among the creaking floorboards and rusted headframes, ghost towns are finding a surprising second life. They have transitioned from sites of economic failure to cultural landmarks, proving that there is significant value in the forgotten. For the modern hiker, ghost towns offer a destination with a narrative. Trails in the Colorado Rockies or the Sierra Nevadas often culminate in the skeletal remains of a mining camp. Reaching a place like Animas Forks, located at over 11,000 feet, is more than a physical challenge. It is an emotional encounter with the past. Hikers walk through the ghost of a community that braved brutal winters in isolation, making the natural scenery feel deeply human. These sites provide a tangible reward that a simple mountain peak cannot, a glimpse into the lived reality of those who came before us. For history buffs, these towns are the ultimate primary source. No textbook can replicate the feeling of standing in the center of St. Elmo, Colorado, one of the most well-preserved ghost towns in the country. Tourism in these areas has evolved into a form of experiential education. Visitors can touch the iron bars of a territorial jail or stand in the pulpit of a church where a community once prayed for rain or gold. Many of these sites now offer guided tours that focus on social history, the stories of the women, immigrants, and laborers whose names were never recorded in the great biographies of the West. By visiting, tourists provide the tax revenue and donations necessary to keep these fragile structures standing.
Photographers remain the most devoted pilgrims to these sites. The aesthetic of abandonment provides a unique playground for light and shadow. In the early morning or golden hour, the sun hits the silvered wood of an abandoned barn in a way that feels ethereal. For the photography community, ghost towns are places of quiet contemplation where they can capture the stillness of time. This influx of creative energy has helped rebrand these towns. They are no longer seen as scary or dangerous, but as places of profound, melancholic beauty. However, this tourism in the tumbleweeds brings a new set of challenges. As towns like Oatman, Arizona, or Tombstone, which survives as a living ghost town, become popular, they risk becoming Disney-fied. When a ghost town starts selling plastic cowboy hats and fudge, it loses the very haunting authenticity that made it special. The goal for the modern visitor is to practice leave no trace tourism, to witness the decay without